The sword comes at your face fast enough to take your head clean off, and you've got maybe half a second to decide whether you want to keep breathing or become an interesting addition to the tournament field's collection of severed body parts. Your helmet weighs 15 pounds. Your chainmail feels like you're wearing a shirt made of iron snakes, and the horse beneath you is dancing sideways because apparently even your destrier thinks charging at a man with a 12-foot lance is a terrible idea. This is your first real tournament, the event that will either make your reputation as a knight or turn you into a cautionary tale told around castle hearths for the next century. You're 22 years old. You've spent the last 15 years training for this exact moment, and right now, as Sir Gareth de Montfort's lance point grows larger in your vision, you're wondering if maybe your father was right when he suggested you consider a nice safe career in the church, but there's no time for second thoughts now. This is what it means to be a knight in the year of our Lord 1347. Violence is your profession, honor is your currency, and death is your most faithful companion. Whether you're facing down French cavalry at Crécy, besieging a castle that's been holding out for 6 months, or trying to survive a tournament where the difference between glory and grave is measured in inches, you live every day knowing that this might be the day you don't come home. Welcome to the life of a medieval knight, where chivalry is a beautiful ideal that gets very messy when it meets reality, and where being a hero usually means being very, very good at killing people. Tonight we're diving into the brutal, beautiful, and absolutely unforgiving world of medieval knighthood, a life that's been romanticized by centuries of poetry and completely misunderstood by Hollywood movies. From the moment you're born into a noble family to the day you die, probably violently, every aspect of your existence is shaped by a code of honor that demands courage, loyalty, and the kind of martial skill that takes decades to master and seconds to prove. So before we begin this journey together into a world of castle walls and battlefield mud, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy exploring history's most fascinating and dangerous professions. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. There's something wonderful about knowing we're all scattered across the modern world, sharing stories of people who lived and died by the sword 8 centuries ago. Now settle in, maybe dim the lights. Perhaps wrap yourself in a blanket that's significantly more comfortable than chainmail, and let's ease into tonight's adventure together, because we're about to discover what it really meant to live as a knight in an age when honor was worth dying for, and steel was the final arbiter of justice. Your story begins not with your birth, but with your bloodline, because in the rigid hierarchy of medieval Europe, becoming a knight isn't about personal choice or individual merit. It's about being born into the right family at the right time with the right connections. You don't earn your way into the warrior aristocracy. You inherit it along with your father's lands, debts, and enemies. It's the year 1325, and you enter the world in a stone castle that's equal parts fortress and home, where the difference between civilized living and violent death is measured by the thickness of the walls and the loyalty of the men who guard them. Your father, Sir William de Vere, is a minor baron who holds 3 villages, 2 manor houses, and approximately 400 peasants from the King of England in exchange for 40 days of military service per year, and an oath of loyalty that's been passed down through 5 generations. Your mother, Lady Margaret, is the daughter of a knight from Normandy, whose family tree includes just enough French nobility to make her marriage politically useful, and just enough English holdings to make it financially practical. She's also tough enough to manage a household of 30 servants while her husband is off fighting the Scots, and diplomatic enough to negotiate truces with neighboring lords who might otherwise decide that your father's lands look better with their banners flying over them. The castle where you're born isn't the fairy tale fortress of later imagination. It's a practical working fortification built for defense rather than comfort, where every room serves a military purpose and every window is designed to shoot arrows from rather than admire the view. The Great Hall doubles as a courtroom and barracks. The chapel serves as both spiritual center and final refuge if the outer walls are breached. Even your nursery is positioned in the safest part of the keep, where thick stone walls and narrow staircases would make it difficult for enemies to reach you if the worst happened. because in your world the worst is always a possibility. Neighboring lords eye your father's lands with the kind of hunger that leads to midnight raids and burning villages. Scottish raiders cross the border whenever they think they can get away with it. French ships probe the coast looking for weakness. And somewhere in London, royal officials are constantly calculating whether your family's loyalty is worth more than the taxes they could collect from a more cooperative vassal. Your earliest memories are shaped by this reality of constant low-level warfare. You fall asleep to the sound of sentries calling challenges from the watchtowers. You learn to walk on floors that echo with the footsteps of armed men. Your lullabies are the songs that soldiers sing to keep themselves awake during long watches. And your bedtime stories are tales of heroic knights who died gloriously in battle defending their lord's honor. It's not exactly a normal childhood. But then again, normal children don't grow up to be knights. By the time you're old enough to walk without falling over your own feet, it becomes clear that your future has already been decided for you. Your older brother Edmund will inherit your father's lands and title when the time comes. Your younger sister Alice will be married off to cement an alliance with another noble family. And you're destined for the life of a knight-errant. A younger son, whose inheritance consists of training, weapons, and the kind of martial education that will either make you wealthy through service to a great lord, or dead in a ditch somewhere. This isn't considered a tragedy. In fact, it's an honor. Knights are the heroes of your age, the men whose deeds are celebrated in songs and whose names are remembered long after kings are forgotten. They're also the men who die young in large numbers. But that's considered a small price to pay for immortal glory. Your education begins the moment you're strong enough to hold a wooden sword without falling over. While other children learn to read and write, you learn to fight. While they study Latin and theology, you study the art of war. While they prepare for lives of scholarship or trade, you prepare for a life where your survival depends on your ability to kill other people before they kill you. It starts with the basics. How to stand, how to move, how to hold a weapon without cutting yourself or your allies. Your first instructor is Sir Marcus, your father's master-at-arms, a grizzled veteran who lost his left eye at the Battle of Bannockburn, and his patience somewhere in the decades since. He's the kind of man who believes that pain is the best teacher, and that mercy is something you show to enemies after you've defeated them, not to students who haven't learned their lessons properly. A knight, Sir Marcus tells you on your first day of training, is a weapon shaped like a man. Everything else, courtesy, chivalry, honor, that's just decoration. Pretty to look at, but useless if the blade isn't sharp enough to cut. He hands you a wooden practice sword that feels impossibly heavy in your 6-year-old hands, and positions you across from a practice dummy that's been hacked to pieces by generations of young nobles learning their trade. Hit it, he says. You swing the sword with all the enthusiasm and technique of someone who's never held a weapon before. The blade connects with the dummy's side, bounces off, and nearly takes your own ear off on the rebound. Sir Marcus sighs deeply, the sound of a man who's spent too many years trying to turn noble children into competent killers. Again, he says, and this time try not to execute yourself. This scene will repeat itself, with variations, for the next 8 years, day after day. Season after season, you'll stand in the castle's training yard and learn the 1,000 different ways to inflict violence on another human being. You'll master the sword, the mace, the lance, and the dagger. You'll learn to fight on foot and on horseback, in armor and without it, alone and in formation with other knights. But more than that, you'll learn to think like a warrior, to read an opponent's intentions in the set of his shoulders, to spot weakness in an enemy's defense, to calculate distances and timing with the precision of a mathematician and the speed of a hunting hawk. It's brutal education, measured in bruises and broken bones, and the kind of exhaustion that makes you wonder if dying wouldn't be easier than getting up for another day of training. But it's also the foundation of everything you'll become, the skills that will keep you alive in a world where being slow or weak or unprepared means being dead. Your days follow a rhythm as regular as church bells and twice as punishing. Dawn brings weapons practice with Sir Marcus, who seems to have an unlimited supply of creative ways to hurt you in the name of education. Morning is for learning to ride, not the gentle pleasure riding that nobles enjoy, but the kind of aggressive horsemanship that lets you control a destrier in the middle of a cavalry charge while wearing 60 pounds of armor and fighting for your life. Afternoon brings lessons in the theoretical aspects of warfare, strategy, tactics, the proper way to conduct a siege, the etiquette of single combat, and the complex web of oaths and obligations that hold feudal society together. Your tutor, Father Benedict, is a Benedictine monk who served as a chaplain with the English army in France and who has strong opinions about the relationship between Christian virtue and military necessity. Remember, he tells you as you study maps of famous battles, a knight serves three masters, his lord, his god, and his honor. Sometimes these loyalties conflict, and when they do, you must choose which one you're willing to die for. Evening brings the more civilized aspects of knightly education, courtly manners, dancing, music, and the art of conversation with people who aren't trying to kill you. These skills might seem less important than swordplay, but they're actually crucial to your future success. A knight who can fight but can't function in polite society is just an expensive soldier. A knight who can charm a lord's daughter and compose poetry while simultaneously planning the defense of a besieged castle, that's the kind of man who rises in the world. You learn to play chess because the game teaches strategic thinking. You learn to hunt because hunting teaches you to work with horses and hounds while developing the quick reflexes and steady hands that translate directly to combat. You learn to speak French because it's the language of the nobility throughout Europe and because you never know when you might need to negotiate a ransom or plan a campaign with foreign allies. Most importantly, you learn the code of chivalry, the complex set of ideals and obligations that supposedly govern knightly behavior. Protect the weak and innocent. Show mercy to defeated enemies. Keep your word even when it costs you everything. Serve your Lord faithfully. Honor God in all things. Treat women with courtesy and respect. It's a beautiful code, full of noble sentiments and high ideals. It's also completely impossible to follow in the real world, where mercy can get you killed, honor can bankrupt you, and protecting the innocent often means doing terrible things to people who probably don't deserve them. But you don't understand this yet. At 14, the contradictions of knighthood still seem manageable. The ideals still shine bright and untarnished. You believe that courage and honor will always triumph, that good knights always defeat evil ones, and that following the code will lead to glory and happiness. The next few years are going to teach you otherwise. Your formal introduction to the reality of knightly life comes not through gradual enlightenment, but through sudden, shocking immersion in a world where ideals collide with necessity, and both usually lose to simple survival. It's the summer of 1339, you're 14 years old, and your father has just informed you that you'll be spending the next 4 years as a page in the household of Thomas de Beauchamp, Earl of Warwick. This isn't an honor exactly, it's a business transaction. Your father needs the Earl's political support for a land dispute with a neighboring baron. The Earl needs young nobles in his household to serve as squires for his knights and to cement alliances with lesser lords. You're the currency that makes this arrangement profitable for both parties. The journey to Warwick Castle takes 3 days through countryside that's equal parts beautiful and terrifying. England in 1339 is still recovering from the Great Famine of 2 decades earlier, and the signs of that catastrophe are everywhere you look. Abandoned villages where the population starved or fled, fields reverting to woodland because there aren't enough people left to work them, churches with crumbling roofs because the tithes that once maintained them dried up along with the people who paid them. But there are also signs of recovery and growing prosperity. New construction in the larger towns, well-maintained roads that speak of increasing trade, and everywhere the banners and badges of knights and nobles who've grown wealthy on French plunder and royal favour. Warwick Castle, when you finally see it, is everything your father's modest stronghold is not. Massive stone towers rise from carefully manicured grounds. The walls are thick enough to walk 3 men abreast along the ramparts, and the great hall could hold your entire family's retinue with room left over for a feast. This is what real power looks like, not just the ability to defend what you own, but the capacity to project force across entire counties and influence the decisions of kings. The Earl himself is a man in his 40s, scarred by campaigns in Scotland and France, with the kind of quiet authority that comes from having commanded men in battles where defeat meant death. He receives you in his private chamber, a room lined with weapons and decorated with captured banners that tell the story of his military career. "So you're William de Vere's boy," he says, looking you up and down with the calculating gaze of someone evaluating a piece of equipment. Your father says you've had good training. We'll see. What follows is 4 years of education that makes your previous training look like gentle exercise. As a page in the Earl's household, you're responsible for serving at table, caring for weapons and armor, and learning the complex etiquette of a great noble's court. But more than that, you're being evaluated constantly, not just for your skills with sword and lance, but for your intelligence, your loyalty, and your potential to become the kind of knight who can be trusted with important responsibilities. The other pages and squires become your new family, bound together by shared hardship and the knowledge that you're all competing for limited opportunities. Some will become household knights, well-regarded servants who spend their careers in comfortable positions with regular pay and limited risk. Others will seek their fortunes as knights-errant, wandering the world in search of employment, adventure, and the kind of dramatic glory that usually ends in dramatic death. A few, the most skilled, most intelligent, or most politically connected, will rise to become banner knights, commanders with the right to lead other knights in battle, and hold lands directly from great lords or even the king himself. Your closest friend among the pages is Robert Fitzalan, a boy your own age, whose father died fighting the Scots, and who's been raised in the Earl's household since he was 8. Robert is everything you're trying to become, skilled with weapons, charming in conversation, and blessed with the kind of easy confidence that comes from never having doubted his place in the world. He's also the one who gives you your first real lesson in the gap between chivalric ideals and political reality. It happens during your second year at Warwick, when news arrives that King Edward III has decided to press his claim to the French throne. The Earl is summoned to provide his feudal service, 40 knights and their retinues, for a campaign that everyone expects will last no more than a few months and result in enough plunder to make everyone involved wealthy for life. You and Robert are assigned to serve as squires to Sir Geoffrey de Clare, one of the Earl's household knights and a veteran of the Scottish wars. Sir Geoffrey is the kind of man the troubadours write songs about. Handsome, brave, skilled with every weapon, and possessed of the kind of personal magnetism that makes other men want to follow him into battle. He's also, as you discover during the crossing to Normandy, a casual murderer who views the French peasantry as legitimate targets for violence whether they resist or not. The reality hits you during your first raid, when Sir Geoffrey leads a small force to forage supplies from French villages near Caen. Foraging, it turns out, is a polite term for robbery with violence, and the code of chivalry apparently doesn't apply to anyone who can't afford to ransom themselves. You watch Sir Geoffrey burn a church because the priest refused to hand over the silver chalices. You see him order the execution of villagers who tried to hide their grain supplies. You stand by helplessly as houses are looted and women are assaulted, because these are your brothers in arms, and questioning their behavior would mark you as weak, unreliable, and unsuitable for knightly advancement. This bothers you. Robert observes that night as you sit around the campfire trying to forget what you've seen. It should bother everyone, you reply. Robert shrugs. The French would do the same to English villagers if they had the chance. Probably worse. At least we're honest about what we're doing. The code of chivalry is for knights fighting other knights, Robert interrupts. Peasants aren't people exactly. They're more like livestock that can talk. You don't apply chivalry to livestock. It's a casual dismissal of everything you've been taught about honor and protection of the innocent, delivered by your best friend with the same tone he might use to discuss the weather. And the worst part is that he's not being cruel or cynical. He genuinely believes what he's saying, because it's what every knight around him believes, because it's the only way to reconcile the reality of medieval warfare with the beautiful ideals of courtly romance. This is your introduction to the central hypocrisy of knightly life. The code only applies when it's convenient, and convenience is usually determined by social class and military necessity. But you don't have time to brood about moral philosophy, because the campaign is just beginning, and there are battles to fight. The Battle of Crécy, fought on August 26, 1346, becomes your baptism in the kind of violence that turns boys into men, and men into legends or corpses. You're 21 years old, serving as Sir Geoffrey's squire, responsible for managing his weapons and horses while staying close enough to assist him if needed, but far enough away to avoid interfering with his combat. The English army has been retreating through northern France for weeks, harassed by superior French forces and running low on supplies. King Edward's great campaign of conquest has turned into a fighting withdrawal, and everyone knows that when the French finally force a battle, it will be under conditions that favor them enormously. The field at Crécy is where that inevitable confrontation finally happens. King Philip VI of France has assembled the largest army anyone has seen in decades, perhaps 30,000 men, including thousands of knights who represent the flower of French nobility. The English force is barely half that size, tired from weeks of marching, and positioned on a slope that offers some defensive advantage but no easy route of retreat. As the sun rises on the day of battle, you help Sir Geoffrey into his armor piece by piece. Mail hauberk, plate reinforcement helm, and the dozens of leather straps and iron buckles that hold it all together. The process takes nearly an hour, and leaves him encased in 60 pounds of steel that will either save his life or cook him alive in the summer heat. Remember, he tells you as you hand him his sword, "If I fall, your job is to get me off the field and ransom me back to my family. If I die, your job is to take my arms and armor to Earl Warwick and tell him I died well. Don't try to be a hero. There'll be plenty of time for heroics when you're a knight yourself." The battle begins with a French crossbow assault that accomplishes absolutely nothing except wasting ammunition and giving the English archers target practice. The Italian crossbowmen hired by King Philip are professionals, but they're fighting at extreme range against English longbowmen who've been practicing since childhood. The French bolts fall short, while English arrows fall like lethal rain among the crossbow units. Then comes the cavalry charge that everyone has been expecting and dreading in equal measure. 3,000 French knights in full armor, mounted on destriers bred for war, thundering across the field in a display of martial magnificence that would be inspiring if it weren't aimed at killing you. This is what you've trained for, dreamed about, and feared since childhood. This is the moment when theories become reality and training becomes survival. The charge is magnificent right up until it hits the English defensive line and disintegrates into chaos. The French knights discover what English military planners have been counting on, that heavy cavalry charging uphill into prepared positions defended by experienced archers is essentially an elaborate form of suicide. Horses go down screaming as arrows punch through armor that was supposed to be invulnerable. Knights who've never been defeated in tournament find themselves trapped under dead mounts, helpless targets for English men-at-arms who care more about ransom money than chivalric honor. The carefully organized charge becomes a confused melee, where individual skill matters less than luck and positioning. Sir Geoffrey fights like the hero he's supposed to be, cutting down French knights and inspiring his men with displays of courage that belong in the songs of troubadours. But heroism doesn't make you invulnerable, and when a French mace connects with his helmet at just the right angle, he goes down hard enough to ring his skull against the inside of his armor. This is your moment. Sir Geoffrey is unconscious but breathing, surrounded by enemies who see him as a valuable source of ransom money. Your job is to drag him to safety, while avoiding the French knights who are equally interested in capturing or killing anyone stupid enough to interfere with their business. What follows is the most terrifying 15 minutes of your life up to this point. You manage to get Sir Geoffrey onto his horse and lead the animal toward the English lines while French knights try to stop you, and English archers try to avoid shooting you by mistake. Arrows whistle past your head close enough to part your hair. A French knight on foot swings a sword at you that misses by inches. A dying horse almost crushes you as it falls. But you make it. You get Sir Geoffrey to the English lines alive, where surgeons examine his wounds and declare that he'll recover with nothing worse than a concussion and a lifelong sensitivity to loud noises. More importantly, you've proven yourself under fire. Earl Warwick himself commends your courage when the battle reports are compiled. Sir Geoffrey, when he regains consciousness 3 days later, announces that you've earned the right to be considered for knighthood. The Battle of Crécy ends with a French defeat so complete that it reshapes the military balance of Europe. Thousands of French knights lie dead on the field, including King Philip's brother, and dozens of the greatest names in French nobility. The English losses are so light that some chroniclers will claim fewer than 50 men died, though the real number is probably higher. But for you, the significance of Crécy isn't strategic or political, it's personal. You've looked death in the face, and neither flinched nor fled. You've demonstrated the kind of courage under fire that separates potential knights from actual ones. and you've discovered something about yourself that will shape the rest of your life. You're good at violence. Not just competent, good. You have the reflexes, the tactical thinking, and the cold-blooded ability to function effectively when other people are trying to kill you. It's a useful skill set in your chosen profession, but it's also a burden that will follow you for the rest of your life, because once you've proven you can handle extreme violence, people start expecting you to handle it regularly. The years that follow Crécy pass in a blur of campaigns, tournaments, and the gradual accumulation of reputation that turns a promising young squire into a knight worth taking seriously. You serve in the siege of Calais, where you learn that starving a city into submission is more effective than storming the walls, but takes considerably longer and smells much worse than the poets suggest. You fight in Scotland, where you discover that Highland warriors are individually brave, collectively undisciplined, and capable of inflicting casualties on English forces that seem much higher than they ought to be, given the disparity in equipment and training. You participate in the great naval battle of Winchelsea, where English ships defeat a Spanish fleet, and you learn that fighting on a ship is like fighting on land, except everything is moving, nothing stays where you put it, and falling down usually means drowning. Between campaigns you compete in tournaments throughout England and France, slowly building the kind of reputation that attracts the attention of great lords and wealthy patrons. Tournament fighting is simultaneously safer and more dangerous than battlefield combat. Safer because the goal is usually to capture rather than kill. More dangerous because you're fighting the best knights in Europe under conditions that reward spectacular displays of individual skill over careful tactical planning. You win some and lose others, but more importantly, you learn how to read an opponent's technique in the first few seconds of a fight, how to manage your horse and weapons simultaneously while wearing armor that restricts your vision and movement, how to gauge distances and timing with the precision necessary to survive when split-second decisions mean the difference between glory and grave. By your 25th birthday, you've achieved something that seemed impossible when you first picked up a wooden sword in your father's courtyard. You've become genuinely dangerous, not just competent or promising, but the kind of knight that other knights think twice about challenging, and that great lords actively recruit for difficult assignments, which is why, in the spring of 1350, you receive a summons that will change your life forever. The letter arrives on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a royal messenger, whose livery and escort make it clear that this isn't routine correspondence. The Earl of Warwick receives you in his private chamber, alone except for his chaplain and his master-at-arms, and the expression on his face tells you that whatever this summons involves, it's both important and dangerous. His Majesty, the Earl begins, has need of knights for a special service, not a campaign or a siege, but something more. He hands you the royal letter, sealed with Edward III's personal arms and written in the formal language that means serious business. The contents are surprisingly brief. You are commanded to present yourself at Windsor Castle within a fortnight, prepared for service of unknown duration in a matter touching the honour of the realm. Do you know what this is about, you ask? The Earl nods slowly. The King is forming a new order of knights, an inner circle of the most capable men in the realm, bound by special oaths and dedicated to upholding the highest ideals of chivalry. He pauses, and when he continues, his voice carries a weight that makes you pay attention. They're calling it the Order of the Garter, and if you're being summoned, it means someone has noticed your service. This could make your fortune, or it could get you killed. Probably both. The journey to Windsor gives you 2 weeks to think about what you're walking into. The Order of the Garter represents King Edward's attempt to create a new model of knighthood, an elite brotherhood that combines the military effectiveness of proven warriors with the political utility of men bound by personal oaths to the crown. It's an experimental approach to the problem of managing the warrior nobility, and like most experiments, it could succeed brilliantly or fail catastrophically. Windsor Castle, when you finally see it, is everything you expect the seat of royal power to be: massive, intimidating, and designed to remind visitors that the King of England commands resources that dwarf those of any individual lord. The great round tower dominates the skyline for miles around, and the ceremonial apartments within are decorated with a magnificence that makes Earl Warwick's wealth seem modest by comparison. But it's not the architecture that impresses you most, it's the men you meet in the castle's halls. These are the finest knights in England, veterans of Crécy and Calais, and a dozen other campaigns. Men whose names are known throughout Europe and whose skills have been proven in the kind of combat that kills the unlucky and elevates the exceptional. Sir John Chandos, the King's Constable, whose tactical genius has shaped English military doctrine for a decade. Sir James Audley, whose personal courage at Poitiers will become the stuff of legend. Sir Bartholomew Burgos, whose service in the Low Countries has made him wealthy beyond the dreams of most knights. And presiding over them all, King Edward himself, a man in his late 30s who has transformed England from a minor European power into the dominant military force of the age. The ceremony that inducts you into the order takes place in St. George's Chapel, in a ritual that combines Christian liturgy with traditions that reach back to the earliest days of knighthood. You kneel before the altar, while the king girds you with the order's distinctive blue garter, and you swear an oath that binds you not just to royal service, but to a standard of conduct that transcends ordinary chivalric obligations. You are no longer merely a knight, the king tells you as the ceremony concludes. You are a knight of the Garter, bound by special trust, and charged with upholding the honor of this realm. Your brothers in this order will trust you with their lives, and you will trust them with yours. Together you will serve as the living embodiment of what English knighthood can achieve. It's an inspiring speech, full of noble sentiments and high ideals. It's also, as you'll discover over the next few years, a job description for some of the most dangerous and morally complicated missions in royal service. Because when the king needs something done that requires both exceptional skill and absolute discretion, he doesn't send regular knights or hired mercenaries. He sends his Garter knights, secure in the knowledge that their personal honor is bound up with the success of their missions, and their silence about the methods required to achieve that success. Your first assignment as a Garter knight arrives 3 months after your induction, delivered verbally by Sir John Chandos in a conversation that officially never happened. There's a problem in the Welsh marches, where a local lord named Rhys ap Gruffydd has been making alliances with Scottish rebels and French agents. The evidence of his treason is strong but not conclusive, and the political situation is too delicate for a direct royal intervention. What's needed is a small group of knights who can investigate the situation, gather definitive proof, and take whatever action proves necessary to resolve the threat. Officially, you'll be traveling to Wales to hunt deer and visit shrines. Unofficially, you'll be conducting what a later age would call a covert operation. The king trusts you to use your judgment, Sir John explains as he hands you sealed orders that you're instructed to burn after reading. But he also expects results. Lord Rhys either swears renewed allegiance to the crown, or he stops being a problem. The method is up to you. What follows is 6 weeks of the kind of work that never appears in chivalric romances: surveillance, investigation, and the gradual accumulation of evidence that Rhys ap Gruffydd is indeed guilty of treason. He's been accepting French gold in exchange for information about English military preparations. He's been coordinating with Scottish agents to plan raids across the border. Most damning of all, he's been recruiting other Welsh lords to join a conspiracy aimed at declaring Welsh independence and seeking French military support. The evidence is conclusive, but it's also been gathered through methods that would be considered dishonourable if employed against a fellow knight: bribery of servants, interception of letters, infiltration of Rhys's household under false pretenses, the kind of espionage that's necessary for royal security, but incompatible with the ideals of chivalric honour. Contaf. When the time comes to act, you face a choice that will define your understanding of what it means to serve the crown. You can challenge Rhys to single combat, hoping that divine justice will vindicate your cause, and his defeat will end the conspiracy, or you can arrange for his death through less honourable but more reliable means, ensuring that the threat is eliminated but compromising your personal honour in the process. You choose reliability over honour. Rhys ap Gruffydd dies in what appears to be a hunting accident, struck down by an arrow that could have come from any bow in his party. His fellow conspirators, deprived of leadership and funding, abandon their plans and return to uneasy loyalty. The Welsh marches remain secure, and King Edward's trust in his Garter knights is confirmed. But the cost of this success is measured in something more valuable than gold or land: your certainty about what knighthood means and what kind of man you're becoming in service to the crown, because you've just discovered that being a perfect knight sometimes requires doing very imperfect things, and that the highest service to chivalric ideals sometimes demands the abandonment of chivalric methods. It's a lesson that will serve you well in the years to come, as the war with France enters a new phase, and the stakes for England's survival grow higher than anyone imagined possible. The next decade of your life unfolds against the backdrop of what historians will later call the 100 Years' War, though at the time it feels less like a single conflict and more like a series of increasingly bitter struggles interrupted by truces that nobody believes will last. You serve the crown in campaigns from Gascony to Scotland, in battles whose names will be remembered for centuries, and skirmishes that are forgotten before the dead are buried. At Poitiers in 1356, you fight beside the Black Prince in a victory so complete that it results in the capture of the French king himself. You're part of the guard that escorts King John II to comfortable captivity in England, where he'll spend the next 4 years as the world's most prestigious prisoner while French nobles bankrupt themselves raising his ransom. The battle itself is a masterpiece of English tactical doctrine, a defensive position that channels French attacks into killing zones, long bowmen who turn heavy cavalry charges into slaughter, and a decisive counterattack that breaks French morale so completely that their army simply disintegrates. Your own contribution is relatively modest. You lead a small force of men-at-arms in the final assault and personally capture 2 French knights whose ransoms will keep you comfortable for the next several years. But what stays with you isn't the tactical brilliance or the financial rewards. It's the moment after the fighting stops, when you walk through a field covered with French dead and realize that most of them were men very much like yourself, younger sons seeking fortune, household knights serving their lords, men-at-arms who joined the campaign because military service was their profession and this was simply their job. War, you're beginning to understand, isn't really about good versus evil or right versus wrong. It's about competing interests backed by organized violence, and the side that applies that violence more effectively usually gets to write the history books. This understanding deepens during the campaigns that follow Poitiers. You serve in the Great Chevauchée of 1359, when the Black Prince leads English forces on a devastating march through central France that's designed not to conquer territory, but to destroy the economic foundation that makes French resistance possible. A chevauchée isn't really a military campaign in the traditional sense. It's organized destruction disguised as warfare. Your job is to burn crops, slaughter livestock, destroy mills and bridges, and generally make it impossible for the French countryside to support armies. It's economically effective, strategically sound, and morally nauseating. You spend months watching English soldiers, good men, many of them systematically destroying the livelihoods of French peasants who have no voice in the political disputes that started this war. You burn churches because they might shelter French soldiers. You kill animals because they might feed French armies. You destroy tools and equipment because they might be used to support French war efforts. The reality is often simple cruelty disguised as tactical thinking, and you participate because refusing orders would mark you as unreliable, unsuitable for advancement, and potentially treasonous. But the worst part isn't the destruction itself, it's how normal it becomes. After the first few weeks, burning a village stops feeling like a moral choice and starts feeling like another item on your daily task list. The screams of civilians become background noise. The sight of destroyed homes becomes as unremarkable as the weather. This is how good men become monsters, you realize. Not through dramatic moral choices or sudden corruption, but through the slow erosion of conscience that comes from doing terrible things for good reasons until you stop being able to tell the difference. The chevauchée ends when winter makes further campaigning impossible, and you return to England with a purse full of plunder and a head full of memories you'd rather forget. But there's no time for brooding about moral philosophy, because the war machine requires constant feeding, and you're one of its most reliable components. Your reputation as a Garter Knight has grown during the French campaigns, and with it comes the kind of assignments that lesser men couldn't handle. King Edward uses you for diplomatic missions that require both military credibility and political sophistication. You negotiate truces with Scottish lords, arrange prisoner exchanges with French nobles, and serve as the crown's representative in disputes that could easily escalate into armed conflict. It's delicate work that requires understanding the motivations of men who may be your enemies tomorrow, and it teaches you skills that pure warriors never develop. How to read the political currents that flow beneath the surface of formal negotiations. How to make promises that sound binding but leave room for interpretation. How to project strength while remaining flexible enough to avoid conflicts that serve no useful purpose. These diplomatic skills prove invaluable when you're appointed to serve as military advisor to the Prince of Wales during his campaigns in Gascony. The Prince, everyone calls him the Black Prince now, though no one is quite sure whether the name refers to his armor or his reputation as one of the finest military commanders of the age. But he's also impulsive, prideful, and inclined to solve political problems through the application of overwhelming force. Your job is to provide the kind of counsel that keeps brilliant commanders from making catastrophic mistakes, and it's exactly as difficult as it sounds. But crisis comes in 1367, when the Black Prince agrees to support Pedro the Cruel in his attempt to reclaim the throne of Castile. It's a tempting opportunity: Spanish gold, French discomfort, and the chance to establish English influence on the Iberian Peninsula. It's also a strategic disaster disguised as an easy victory. You try to explain the problems to the prince during the planning stages. Castile is mountainous, difficult to supply, and full of people who don't particularly want to be ruled by Pedro, regardless of his legitimate claim to the throne. The French will support his rival, turning any English intervention into a proxy war that could last for decades. Most importantly, the costs of the campaign will far exceed any possible benefits. Even if everything goes perfectly, the prince listens to your arguments with the patience of someone who's already made up his mind and is only going through the motions of consultation. You worry too much about details, he tells you after rejecting your final attempt to dissuade him. Sometimes you have to trust that English steel and English courage can overcome any obstacle. The campaign of Nájera proves him both right and wrong. English steel and courage do indeed overcome Spanish resistance, defeating Pedro's rival in a battle that showcases everything the English military machine does well. Your cavalry charges break Spanish formations. Your archers slaughter Spanish infantry. Your men-at-arms capture enough Spanish nobles to pay for the campaign twice over. But victory in battle doesn't solve the underlying political problems, and within months it becomes clear that Pedro's restoration has created more enemies than it eliminated. Spanish guerrillas harass English supply lines. French agents fund resistance movements throughout Castile. The cost of maintaining an army in hostile territory begins to drain the prince's treasury and exhaust his men. Worse, Pedro proves to be exactly the kind of ruler his nickname suggests: cruel, arbitrary, and so unpopular that his own subjects start looking to his enemies as potential liberators. Supporting him requires increasingly brutal methods to suppress resistance, methods that tarnish English reputation and make future diplomacy more difficult. You spend 2 years in Spain watching a brilliant tactical victory turn into a strategic catastrophe, and the experience teaches you something important about the relationship between military skill and political wisdom. Knowing how to win battles doesn't automatically qualify you to understand when battles should be fought, and the most dangerous commanders are often those who are too successful for their own good. The Spanish campaign ends not with dramatic defeat, but with quiet withdrawal. English forces pulling back to Gascony, while Pedro's enemies reclaim most of his kingdom. The prince has won every battle and lost the war, bankrupted his treasury, and exhausted his army in service of a cause that was doomed from the beginning. But the real cost isn't measured in gold or territory, it's measured in the prince's health, which has been broken by years of campaigning in hostile climates, and in his reputation, which has been tarnished by association with a ruler whose cruelty has become legendary throughout Europe. When you return to England in 1371, the Black Prince is already showing symptoms of the illness that will kill him 5 years later. The greatest military commander of his generation is becoming a shadow of himself, worn down by campaigns that demanded everything he had to give, and more besides. It's a sobering reminder that even the most successful warriors pay a price for their victories, and that price isn't always counted in wounds that heal or scars that fade. Your own health has survived the Spanish campaigns better than the prince's, but you're beginning to feel the accumulated weight of 20 years of military service. Your sword arm aches on cold mornings. Your back protests when you spend long hours in the saddle. The old wound from Poitiers throbs when storms approach. More than that, you're starting to understand that your career as an active warrior is entering its final phase. You're 46 years old, which makes you a veteran by any standard, and ancient by the standards of men whose profession involves regular exposure to sharp objects wielded by hostile strangers. It's time to start thinking about the next phase of your life, the years when you'll serve the crown through counsel rather than combat, when your value will be measured in wisdom rather than prowess with weapons. But first, there's one more war to fight. The resumption of hostilities with France in 1369 finds you serving in a new capacity, commander of a company of men-at-arms assigned to defend the English positions in Gascony. It's a significant promotion, recognition of your skills as both warrior and leader, and it comes with responsibilities that extend far beyond personal combat. You're now responsible for the lives and welfare of 200 professional soldiers, men who've entrusted their careers and their safety to your judgment. Some are veterans of previous campaigns, grizzled sergeants who've survived decades of warfare through skill and luck. Others are young knights seeking their first taste of real combat, eager to prove themselves worthy of advancement. They need to believe that you understand their interests, that you'll spend their lives carefully rather than wastefully, and that following you offers better prospects for survival and advancement than following someone else. It's a different kind of pressure than anything you've experienced before. When your own life was the only one at stake, you could afford to take risks that might not pay off. Now, every decision you make affects men who've placed their trust in you, and the weight of that responsibility changes how you approach every aspect of military service. Your first major test as a commander comes during the siege of La Réole, a French fortress that controls river traffic on the Garonne and threatens English supply lines throughout southwestern Gascony. The fortress is strong, well supplied, and defended by experienced soldiers who have no intention of surrendering without a fight. Traditional siege tactics would involve surrounding the fortress, cutting off its supplies, and waiting for starvation to force surrender. It's a methodical approach that minimizes casualties but can take months or even years to succeed, and time is something the English forces in Gascony don't have. Instead, you develop a more aggressive strategy that combines traditional siege engines with innovative assault tactics. Your men dig tunnels beneath the fortress walls, while your engineers build towers that allow archers to shoot down into the courtyard. But the real breakthrough comes when you realize that the fortress's strength, its position on a rocky outcrop, is also its weakness. The same geological features that make the walls difficult to attack also make it impossible to dig proper foundations for the entire perimeter. There's a section of the eastern wall where the builders had to rely on mortar and prayer rather than solid stone, and careful observation reveals that this section shifts slightly during heavy rains. You spend 3 weeks waiting for the right weather conditions, then launch a coordinated assault that combines a diversionary attack on the main gate with a concentrated effort to bring down the weakened wall section. It works perfectly. The wall collapses under bombardment, your men pour through the breach, and the fortress falls in less than 6 hours. The victory establishes your reputation as a commander who can solve problems that defeat other officers, and it leads to a series of promotions that culminate in your appointment as military governor of English-held territories in the Dordogne Valley. It's a position that requires as much diplomatic skill as military competence, because governing conquered territory means dealing with local populations who may or may not support English rule, French nobles who may or may not be planning rebellion, and English officials who may or may not be embezzling funds meant for military expenses. You establish your headquarters in the castle of Bergerac, a fortress that's been English for 30 years, but still feels more French than English in its architecture, customs, and loyalties. Your staff includes English knights, Gascon nobles who've allied with England for various reasons, and French bureaucrats who've decided that cooperation with the occupying power offers better prospects than resistance. Managing this collection of competing interests and divided loyalties requires skills that weren't covered in your knightly education. You learn to read the political currents that flow beneath formal relationships. You develop an understanding of how local economics affects military capabilities. You master the art of projecting authority while remaining flexible enough to accommodate local customs and preferences. Most importantly, you learn that successful occupation requires something more than military dominance. It requires convincing the governed that English rule offers advantages that native rule doesn't provide: better security, fairer justice, more opportunities for advancement, or simply more competent administration. This isn't always possible. Some people will resist foreign rule regardless of its practical benefits, and some situations can only be resolved through force. but you discover that force is most effective when it's applied selectively against specific threats, rather than generally against entire populations. The approach works well enough to keep your territory stable during a period when English positions throughout France are under constant pressure. Your annual reports to the Crown show steadily increasing tax revenues, declining incidents of rebellion, and growing cooperation between English administrators and local officials. But stability comes at a personal cost that you're only beginning to understand. The skills that make you an effective governor, political flexibility, moral pragmatism, the ability to work with people whose ultimate loyalties are questionable, are exactly the opposite of the virtues that define traditional knighthood. You find yourself making compromises that would have been unthinkable to the young man who first put on spurs 25 years ago. You work with French officials who are probably sending intelligence to English enemies. You enforce policies that benefit English interests at the expense of local populations. You maintain order through methods that sometimes violate the chivalric principles you swore to uphold. The justification is always the same: necessity, duty, service to the Crown. The reality is that you're becoming someone you're not sure you recognize, shaped by responsibilities that require flexibility about principles you once considered absolute. It's during this period of moral complexity and political responsibility that you receive news that changes everything. The Black Prince is dying. The man who was supposed to inherit the English throne, who represented the future of English military dominance, who embodied everything noble and heroic about knighthood, is wasting away from an illness that no physician can cure and no amount of royal gold can purchase relief from. His death in 1376 creates a succession crisis that will define English politics for the next century. King Edward III is old, ill, and increasingly unable to manage the daily business of kingship. The Black Prince's son Richard is 9 years old enough to inherit the throne but too young to rule effectively. The kingdom faces the prospect of a regency government that will have to navigate French military pressure, domestic political tensions, and the economic problems created by decades of expensive warfare. For you, personally, the prince's death represents the end of an era. He was your patron, your commander, and in many ways your model of what English knighthood could achieve when it combined military excellence with political intelligence. His death leaves you without a clear patron at court and uncertain about your future role in royal service. But it also represents an opportunity. The regency government will need experienced men who can be trusted with important responsibilities. Men whose loyalty to the crown transcends personal relationships and factional politics. Your record of service, your reputation for competence, and your demonstrated ability to manage complex situations make you exactly the kind of official the new regime will value. The summons to return to England arrives 6 months after the prince's death, delivered by royal messenger with instructions to transfer your responsibilities in Gascony to a successor and present yourself at Westminster Palace for reassignment. The journey home takes 3 weeks, travelling through countryside that shows the effects of 40 years of intermittent warfare. Some regions are prosperous, their fields well tended and their towns bustling with trade. Others bear the scars of military campaigns, abandoned villages, overgrown fields, churches with damaged roofs and empty bell towers. England itself looks different than it did when you left for your first campaign 30 years ago. The population has recovered from the devastating plague outbreaks of mid-century, but the social structure has been permanently altered. Peasants who survived the Black Death have discovered that their labor is valuable enough to command higher wages and better working conditions. Merchants have grown wealthy on war profits and royal contracts. The old certainties about social hierarchy and feudal obligations have been shaken by economic changes that no one fully understands. Westminster Palace, when you finally reach it, is a hive of political activity centered around the young King Richard and the various nobles who compete for influence over his decisions. The atmosphere is tense, uncertain, filled with the kind of careful maneuvering that characterizes courts where power is contested rather than securely held. Your audience with the king takes place in the royal chamber, in the presence of his principal advisors, and with all the ceremony appropriate to your rank and service record. Richard is 10 years old now, old enough to participate in formal proceedings, but still clearly dependent on the adults who surround him for actual decision-making. The conversation is conducted primarily with John of Gaunt, the king's uncle, and the most powerful man in the regency government. He's a man in his 30s, experienced in both war and politics, and blessed with the kind of calm authority that comes from never having doubted his right to command other people. Sir William, he begins, using the formal address that indicates this is official business. Your service in France has been exemplary. The Crown has need of men with your experience and capabilities. He pauses, and when he continues, his tone makes it clear that what follows is not a request. You are appointed Captain of Calais, responsible for the defense of our most important continental possession and the security of the channel crossing that maintains our connection to our French territories. It's a significant promotion, one of the most important military commands in English service. Calais is the key to English strategy in France, the port that allows rapid deployment of reinforcements, and the fortress that provides a secure base for future campaigns. Losing Calais would effectively end English hopes of maintaining their continental empire. It's also, as you understand immediately, a poisoned chalice. Calais is under constant French pressure, expensive to maintain, and dependent on supply lines that can be disrupted by storms, enemy action, or simple administrative incompetence. The previous captain died under circumstances that were either assassination or suicide, depending on which rumors you believe. But refusing the appointment isn't an option. This is how the feudal system works. Service is repaid with greater responsibility, and greater responsibility requires accepting whatever dangers come with it. I am honored by His Majesty's confidence, you reply, using the formal language that indicates acceptance without enthusiasm. And so, at the age of 51, you find yourself appointed to a position that will either crown your career with glory or end it in catastrophic failure. The journey to Calais takes you across the English Channel on a stormy day in March, when the crossing that usually takes 6 hours stretches to 12 and leaves you wondering if drowning might be preferable to continuing to endure the combination of seasickness and existential dread that comes with accepting impossible responsibilities. Calais, when you finally see it through the rain and sea spray, is everything you expected and nothing you hoped for. The fortifications are strong, walls thick enough to resist any siege engine, towers positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire, a harbour deep enough to accommodate the larger ships but narrow enough to be easily defended. But the city behind those walls is struggling. The garrison is under strength, undermotivated, and underpaid. The civilian population is caught between loyalty to England and sympathy for France, uncertain about their future and resentful of the taxes required to maintain the military presence that protects them. The administrators are competent but overwhelmed, trying to manage a complex operation with insufficient resources and contradictory instructions from London. Your first priority is establishing control over the situation, not through dramatic gestures or inspiring speeches, but through the kind of careful, methodical work that turns chaotic situations into manageable ones. You review the garrison rosters and discover that nearly a quarter of the authorized positions are vacant, with the soldiers' pay being pocketed by officers who report them as present for duty. You examine the supply records and find evidence of systematic embezzlement that's been redirecting funds meant for fortification maintenance to private accounts. You interview local officials and learn about French intelligence networks that have been operating in the city for years. It's the kind of problem that can't be solved through combat prowess or personal heroism. It requires administrative competence, political sophistication, and the willingness to make enemies of people who've been profiting from the chaos you're trying to eliminate. But you've spent the last 5 years learning exactly these skills during your service as a territorial governor, and you apply them with the systematic thoroughness that has characterized your approach to every challenge throughout your career. Corrupt officers are dismissed and replaced with men whose honesty you can verify. Supply contracts are renegotiated with merchants who understand that cheating the crown is a career-ending mistake. Intelligence networks are penetrated and rolled up through a combination of bribery, blackmail, and carefully applied pressure. Within 6 months, Calais is functioning more effectively than it has in years. The garrison is at full strength and properly motivated. The fortifications are being maintained according to military standards. The civilian population is cooperating with English administration rather than undermining it. More importantly, you've established the kind of reputation that makes potential enemies think twice about challenging your authority. French spies know that operating in Calais has become significantly more dangerous. Corrupt officials understand that the new captain can't be bought or intimidated. Even the merchants who supply the garrison treat their contracts as binding obligations rather than suggestions to be ignored when more profitable opportunities arise. But success in administration doesn't eliminate the fundamental strategic problem that defines your position. Calais is an English island in a French sea, dependent on supply lines that cross hostile territory and naval routes that can be disrupted by enemies who outnumber English forces by significant margins. The test of your defensive preparations comes in the summer of 1380, when French forces under the command of Philip the Bold, Duke of Burgundy, launch a major assault designed to recapture the city and eliminate the English foothold on the continent. The siege that follows becomes your final examination in the military profession you've practiced for 35 years. Everything you've learned about warfare, leadership, and the management of men under extreme stress will be tested against an enemy force that outnumbers your garrison by more than 3 to 1, and includes some of the finest soldiers in Europe. The French approach is methodical and professional, exactly what you'd expect from commanders who've studied the failures of previous attempts to recapture Calais. They establish a complete blockade of the harbour, cutting off your seaborne supply lines. They position siege engines to bombard the walls systematically, rather than attempting dramatic assaults that would favour the defenders. Most importantly, they settle in for a long siege, confident that time and attrition will accomplish what direct attack might not. Your response combines traditional defensive tactics with innovations developed during your years of experience with siege warfare. You organize the civilian population to support the garrison rather than simply enduring the siege passively. You implement rationing systems that stretch your food supplies while maintaining morale. You coordinate with English naval forces to break the blockade and bring in reinforcements and supplies. But the key to your defense isn't tactical brilliance or superior resources. It's the systematic preparation that began the day you arrived in Calais. The garrison fights effectively because you've spent 2 years ensuring that they're properly trained, equipped, and motivated. The fortifications hold because you've maintained them according to military standards rather than accepting gradual deterioration. The civilian population cooperates because you've governed them fairly rather than treating them as a conquered enemy. The siege lasts 4 months from July to November, and ends not with dramatic assault or negotiated surrender, but with French withdrawal due to logistical problems and the approach of winter weather that makes continued operations impractical. You've held Calais against the most serious French challenge in a generation, established your reputation as one of the most capable military commanders in English service, and proven that experience and preparation can triumph over superior numbers when properly applied. But victory comes with a personal cost that you're only beginning to understand. The stress of command during the siege has aged you in ways that go beyond the physical effects of sleepless nights and constant tension. You find yourself questioning decisions that once seemed clear, doubting judgments that once felt certain, wondering whether the sacrifices required by your profession are worth the results they achieve. The garrison under your command suffered nearly 200 casualties during the siege, men who died or were permanently disabled, because you decided that holding Calais was worth the price in blood and suffering. Most of them were good soldiers following orders they trusted were necessary and just. Some were friends whose company you'd enjoyed during the quiet periods between military emergencies. All of them are gone because you made the choice to fight rather than surrender, and that choice will follow you for the rest of your life. The years that follow the successful defense of Calais pass quietly, marked more by administrative routine than military drama. You spend your time managing the complex business of frontier governance, coordinating with English forces throughout northern France, negotiating local truces that keep small disputes from escalating into major conflicts, and maintaining the delicate balance between military necessity and political pragmatism that keeps your position viable. It's satisfying work in its way, the kind of service that builds lasting peace rather than winning immediate glory. But it's also the work of an aging warrior who's reached the limits of what physical courage and martial skill can accomplish. You're 58 years old now, and your body bears the accumulated damage of 4 decades of military service. The wound from Poitiers has never properly healed, leaving you with chronic pain that worsens during cold weather. Your sword arm lacks the strength it had in your prime, and your reflexes have slowed just enough to make personal combat a significantly more dangerous proposition than it used to be. More than that, You've reached the point in your career where your value lies more in experience and judgment than in personal prowess with weapons. Young knights seek your counsel about military tactics and political strategy. Experienced commanders defer to your opinion about logistical planning and siege warfare. Even your enemies treat you with the respect accorded to masters of the profession, rather than merely competent practitioners. It's an honorable position, recognition of lifetime achievement in a demanding field, but it's also a reminder that your active career is approaching its end, and that the time has come to start thinking about legacy, rather than advancement. The decision to retire from active military service comes not through dramatic revelation, but through gradual recognition that your effectiveness is beginning to decline in ways that could endanger the men under your command. You notice that you're relying more heavily on subordinates for tasks you once handled personally. You find yourself avoiding situations that would have been routine challenges in your youth. Most tellingly, you realize that you're more concerned with preserving what you've achieved than with pursuing new opportunities for distinction. It's time to step aside while your reputation remains intact and your service record speaks for itself. The process of transferring command of Calais to your successor takes 6 months, during which you gradually shift responsibilities while ensuring that the transition doesn't create opportunities for enemies to exploit. Your replacement is Sir Robert Knowles, a knight 20 years your junior whose service record in France has prepared him for the challenges of frontier command. The ceremony that marks your official retirement takes place in Westminster Palace, in the presence of King Richard and the principal officers of his government. It's a formal recognition of career service that includes a royal pension, grants of land that will provide income for your remaining years, and the kind of public acknowledgement that ensures your reputation will survive your departure from active duty. Sir William de Vere, the King, declares in the formal language appropriate to such occasions, "Your service to this realm has been exemplary in war and peace, marked by courage in battle and wisdom in council. You retire with the gratitude of your sovereign and the respect of your brothers in arms. It's a gracious tribute, and you accept it with the dignity appropriate to a man who's spent his adult life in royal service. But the moment that matters most comes afterward, during the informal gathering where your colleagues and former subordinates share the kind of memories that don't appear in official records. Stories about battles fought and won, sieges endured and lifted, campaigns that succeeded against impossible odds, and others that failed despite careful planning. Reminiscences about friends lost and enemies defeated, moments of terror and triumph that defined careers and shaped characters. These are the real rewards of military service, not the formal honors or material benefits, but the bonds forged with men who've shared danger and hardship, who understand the costs of the choices you've made and the reasons why those choices were necessary. As the evening progresses and the wine flows more freely, the conversation turns to the question that follows every veteran: what comes next? For some knights, retirement means managing estates and serving in local government, applying military experience to civilian administration. Others turn to the church, seeking spiritual solace for the violence they've witnessed and participated in. A few become military advisors or mercenary commanders, selling their expertise to foreign princes or ambitious nobles. For you, the answer is simpler and more complex than any of these alternatives. You're going home, back to the castle where you were born, the lands your family has held for generations, the life of a country gentleman that represents everything you've fought to preserve throughout your career. It's not a dramatic ending, no final battle or glorious sacrifice, just the quiet conclusion of a life spent in service to ideals that were sometimes beautiful, sometimes terrible, and always more complicated than the song suggested. The journey home takes you through countryside that's changed dramatically during the 4 decades of your military service. England in 1385 is more prosperous, more populous, and more confident than the kingdom you left as a young man seeking fortune and glory. The effects of the Great Plague have faded, replaced by economic growth fueled by war profits and expanded trade. Villages that were abandoned are now thriving communities. Fields that lay fallow are now productive farmland. But there are also signs of the social tensions that will define English politics for the next century. Peasants who've discovered the economic power of their labor are no longer willing to accept traditional feudal obligations without question. Merchants who've grown wealthy through trade and manufacturing are demanding political influence commensurate with their economic importance. The rigid social hierarchies that once seemed natural and permanent are beginning to show cracks that suggest fundamental changes ahead. Your own family's castle, when you finally see it after an absence of 15 years, represents both continuity and change. The walls are as strong as ever, the towers as imposing, but the domestic arrangements reflect the influence of your sister Alice, who's managed the estate during your absence, and who's introduced innovations that make daily life more comfortable and the agricultural operations more profitable. The Great Hall has been expanded and decorated with tapestries that tell the story of your military career. The chapel has been rebuilt with windows that fill the space with colored light. The kitchens have been reorganized to serve a larger household more efficiently. Most importantly, the castle now serves as the center of a community rather than simply a fortress. The village that has grown up around its walls includes craftsmen, merchants and farmers whose prosperity depends on the security and stability your family provides. It's a functioning example of the feudal ideal: protection offered in exchange for service, authority exercised for the benefit of all, rather than the advantage of few. The Great Hall is filled with neighbors, tenants, and old friends who've gathered to welcome home the local boy who became a knight of international reputation. The conversation flows from local gossip to international politics, from agricultural techniques to military strategy, from family news to memories of adventures shared and dangers survived. But the moment that defines your return comes the next morning, when you walk alone through the countryside where you spent your childhood, the fields where you learnt to ride, the woods where you hunted your first deer, the streams where you practiced swimming in armor, all unchanged in their essential character despite the passage of decades. Standing in the meadow where you first picked up a wooden sword under Sir Marcus's watchful eye, you realize that your life has come full circle. The boy who dreamed of knightly glory has become the man who understands the true cost of achieving it. The dreams have been fulfilled, the goals accomplished, the reputation established. But more than that, you've learnt something about the relationship between ideals and reality, between the beautiful theories of chivalric romance and the brutal necessities of medieval warfare. The code of knighthood isn't a set of rules to be followed blindly. It's a framework for making moral choices in situations where all available options involve moral compromise. You've killed men who didn't deserve to die, and spared others who probably did. You've served causes that were just and others that were merely convenient. You've upheld the code when it served noble purposes, and violated it when practical necessity demanded different choices. And through it all, you've tried to be the kind of man who could look at himself in a mirror without flinching, who could face his family and friends without shame, who could stand before God at the final judgment and account for his choices without despair. It's not a perfect record, no knight's ever is, but it's an honest one, marked by service rather than self-interest, by loyalty rather than opportunism, by the kind of courage that shows itself in daily choices rather than dramatic gestures. The remaining years of your life pass peacefully, divided between managing your estate and serving in local government positions that make use of your administrative experience without requiring the physical demands of active military service. You sit as a justice of the peace, arbitrating disputes and enforcing royal law. You serve on commissions that oversee road maintenance and bridge construction. You advise younger knights who seek guidance about military careers and political service. It's useful work that benefits your community and maintains your connection to the broader world of English politics and military affairs. But it's also the work of a man whose great adventures are behind him, whose legacy is established, whose remaining duty is to preserve what he's built rather than seek new conquests. Your death, when it comes in the winter of 1398, is as peaceful as your retirement. No battlefield wounds or tournament injuries, just the gradual failing of a body that's given everything it had to give in service of causes larger than itself. You die in your own bed, surrounded by family and friends, attended by priests who've known you since childhood and who understand both your achievements and your failures. The funeral that follows is attended by representatives of the king, fellow knights who've served alongside you, and common people whose lives have been touched by your service. The eulogies speak of courage in battle and wisdom in council, of loyalty to crown and kindness to subjects, of a life well lived in service of noble ideals. Your tomb in the family chapel bears an inscription that captures the essence of your career. Here lies Sir William de Vere, Knight of the Garter, who served his king faithfully, led his men bravely, and died with honor intact. It's a simple epitaph for a complex life, but it contains everything that matters about the profession you chose and the way you practiced it. In an age when honor was the highest currency and service the greatest virtue, you spent both wisely and well, and in the end, that's all any knight can hope for. To have lived according to the code, to have served something greater than personal ambition, and to have left the world a little better than you found it through the application of courage, skill, and wisdom to the eternal struggle between civilization and chaos. Your story is finished, but the ideals you represented continue. In every young person who chooses service over self-interest, in every leader who accepts responsibility for others' welfare, in every individual who stands up for what's right despite personal cost, the spirit of knighthood lives on, because in the end, being a knight isn't about wearing armor or carrying swords or winning battles. It's about choosing to be the kind of person who protects what deserves protection, serves what deserves service, and fights for what deserves fighting for. And that choice is available to every generation, in every age, for as long as human beings are capable of choosing honor over convenience and duty over comfort. But that's still decades in the future, isn't it? Right now, as you sit in that great hall at Windsor Castle, wine warming your blood, and the weight of new responsibilities settling on your shoulders like a familiar cloak, you're still in the middle of your story. The summons that arrived that morning wasn't just another assignment, it was recognition that you've become the kind of knight the crown trusts with its most delicate problems. The parchment bearing the royal seal had been brief but significant. His Majesty requires your immediate attendance for consultation regarding matters of state, touching the realm's security. Translated from diplomatic language into plain speech, it meant that someone somewhere needed to be dealt with quietly and permanently, and you were one of the few men the king trusted to handle such arrangements without creating political complications. Which brings us back to that tournament field where everything began, doesn't it? Because the skills that allowed you to unseat Sir Gareth de Montfort in front of half the nobility of England, the ability to read an opponent's intentions, to strike at precisely the right moment, to remain calm under pressure that would break lesser men, those same skills have served you well in situations where the stakes were considerably higher than tournament prizes. The lance comes at you like a falling tree, and time does that strange thing it does in moments of extreme violence, simultaneously speeding up and slowing down until you can see individual splinters in the wood grain of Sir Gareth's weapon, while also feeling like the whole world is moving through honey. Your training kicks in before your conscious mind has time to panic. Legs tight against your destrier's sides, body low in the saddle, your own lance aimed at the sweet spot just below Sir Gareth's shoulder, where his armor plates create a gap that might, if you're very skilled or very lucky, allow you to unhorse him without actually killing him. Because that's the thing about tournaments that the songs never quite capture. The line between glorious victory and tragic accident is measured in inches and split seconds, and even the most skilled knights sometimes discover that the difference between knocking someone off their horse and putting a lance through their chest is smaller than anyone wants to admit. The impact, when it comes, is like being hit by a lightning bolt made of wood and steel. Sir Gareth's lance catches you on the shoulder, spinning you halfway around in your saddle and sending a shock through your armor that makes your teeth rattle. But your own lance finds its mark, striking him squarely in the chest with enough force to lift him clean out of his saddle and send him crashing to the ground in a spectacular display of flailing limbs and flying armor pieces. The crowd erupts in cheers and gasps because unhorsing Sir Gareth de Montfort on your first tournament appearance is roughly equivalent to beating a master swordsman in single combat while blindfolded. It's the kind of upset victory that makes reputations and launches careers, assuming you survive long enough to enjoy the benefits. Sir Gareth, meanwhile, is lying on his back in the tournament sand, looking up at the sky and probably wondering if he suffered any injuries more serious than bruised pride. Tournament armor is designed to prevent death rather than injury, which means participants regularly walk away from impacts that would kill them if they were wearing battlefield gear. But they don't necessarily walk away comfortable. You guide your destrier over to where he's fallen, dismount with the careful dignity that the moment requires, and offer him your hand to help him stand. It's a gesture of chivalric courtesy, the kind of thing that separates noble combat from common brawling, and it's also a political necessity because Sir Gareth's family has enough influence to make your life very difficult if they decide you've shown insufficient respect. Well struck, he says as you help him to his feet, his voice carrying through his helmet with the kind of good humor that marks the difference between a professional warrior and a dangerous psychopath. That's the best lance work I've seen from someone your age since I was someone your age. It's a gracious concession from a man who's just been publicly embarrassed by an upstart, and it establishes the tone for what follows. Because tournament culture depends on the understanding that today's victor might be tomorrow's defeated, and maintaining relationships with your competitors is just as important as defeating them. The victory feast that night is your first real introduction to the social side of knighthood, the complex web of relationships and obligations that determines advancement as much as martial skill. You're seated at the high table, not in a position of particular honor, but close enough to the important guests to be included in their conversations. Earl Warwick uses the occasion to introduce you to influential nobles who might have need of your services. Sir John Chandos, the King's Constable, engages you in a discussion about military tactics that's clearly designed to evaluate your intelligence as much as your knowledge. Lady Margaret de Clare, one of the most powerful women in England, asks pointed questions about your family connections and personal ambitions. It's all very civilized, very courtly, and underneath the polite conversation runs a current of calculation that would make a merchant envious. Everyone is evaluating everyone else, measuring potential usefulness against likely costs, determining who might be worth cultivating and who should be politely ignored. You navigate these waters with the careful attention of someone who understands that saying the wrong thing to the wrong person could end your career before it properly begins. You're deferential without being obsequious, confident without being arrogant, ambitious without appearing grasping. But the most important conversation of the evening happens not at the high table, but in a quiet corner, where Robert Fitzalan pulls you aside for a private discussion that will shape the next phase of your life. "That was impressive today," he says, his voice carrying the kind of seriousness that suggests this isn't just friendly congratulation. Sir John was watching you very carefully during the tournament, and again during dinner. I think you've caught his attention. Sir John Chandos is more than just the King's Constable. He's one of the most influential military leaders in England, a man whose recommendation can open doors that would otherwise remain permanently closed. If he's interested in your potential, it could mean opportunities that would take other knights decades to earn. What kind of attention, you ask, because in royal service, attention can be either beneficial or dangerous, and it's important to understand which kind you're receiving. Robert glances around to make sure you're not being overheard, then leans closer. The kind that leads to special assignments, difficult ones, the sort of work that makes careers or ends them, usually without much middle ground. It's both promise and warning, delivered by someone who's known you long enough to understand your character and your ambitions. Robert has served in Sir John's household for 2 years now, and his insights into the workings of royal service are invaluable for someone trying to chart a path through the complexities of court politics.
Would you recommend accepting if the opportunity arises, you ask? Robert considers the question seriously, weighing his words carefully before responding. That depends on what you want from your life. If you want comfort and security, there are easier paths to follow. But if you want to be someone who matters, someone whose name is remembered after his death, he shrugs. Sometimes the most dangerous opportunities are also the most valuable ones. The opportunity comes sooner than you expect, delivered not through formal channels, but through a chance encounter that illustrates how much of life at the highest levels depends on being in the right place at the right time. You're practicing swordwork in the castle's training yard, 3 days after the tournament, working through the exercises that Sir Marcus drilled into you years ago, when Sir John Chandos appears at the edge of the practice area. He watches for perhaps 10 minutes, saying nothing, just observing your technique and footwork with the critical eye of someone who's seen enough warriors to distinguish between competence and genuine skill. When you finally notice his presence and stop to acknowledge him properly, he approaches with the kind of casual authority that comes from never having doubted his right to command other people's attention. "Your sword work is clean," he says without preamble. "Good balance, no wasted motion, proper distance management. Who taught you?" "Sir Marcus Blackwood, my lord, my father's master-at-arms." Sir John nods approvingly. "I knew Marcus. Good man, excellent teacher. Died at Neville's Cross, didn't he?" "Yes, my lord, 3 years ago. A loss for the profession." He pauses, studying you with the kind of intensity that makes you understand why he's successful at evaluating people. "Tell me, what do you know about the situation in Scotland?"
It's not the kind of question that admits of casual answers. Scottish politics in 1347 are a maze of competing claimants, French alliances and English interventions that changes almost monthly. but you've been following the situation as part of your education in the broader strategic picture that defines knightly service. Current Coward and Neville's Cross. You begin carefully. He's being held in the Tower, pending ransom negotiations. The Regency government is divided between those who want to continue resistance and those who favour accommodation with England. French support has been inconsistent since they have their own problems to deal with. Sir John listens without comment, and when you finish, he asks the kind of follow-up question that reveals whether you understand implications as well as facts. And what does that situation suggest about English opportunities and dangers? You think for a moment, organising your thoughts before responding. Opportunities to exploit Scottish divisions, possibly to install a client king who would be more amenable to English interests. Dangers from French intervention if they decide Scottish independence serves their strategic goals, and from prolonged resistance that would drain English resources without producing decisive results. Exactly. Sir John's tone carries the satisfaction of someone whose evaluation has been confirmed. The king has decided that the Scottish situation requires careful attention, not a major campaign, but targeted intervention by people who can be trusted to act with appropriate discretion. The phrase appropriate discretion is loaded with implications that you're beginning to understand. It means work that can't be conducted through official channels, missions that require deniability, operations that might involve methods inconsistent with chivalric ideals, but necessary for royal policy. I would be honoured to serve in whatever capacity His Majesty deems appropriate, you say, using the formal language that indicates acceptance without committing to specifics you don't yet understand. Sir John smiles, and it's not entirely reassuring.
Good. Report to my quarters tomorrow morning. We have work to discuss.
The mission that Sir John outlines the next morning is exactly the kind of assignment that separates ambitious young knights from those who prefer the relative safety of conventional military service. The official story is that you'll be travelling to Scotland as part of a diplomatic mission to negotiate prisoner exchanges and local truces. The unofficial reality is that you'll be gathering intelligence about Scottish political divisions and identifying potential allies who might be willing to support English interests in exchange for appropriate incentives. It's espionage disguised as diplomacy, the kind of work that requires skills not taught in any knightly education, but essential for anyone who wants to serve the crown effectively, in an age where military force must be supplemented by political sophistication. Your cover identity is solid enough to pass casual inspection. Sir William de Vere, representing Earl Warwick's interests in negotiations concerning prisoners taken during recent border raids. It's plausible, uncontroversial, and boring enough to avoid attracting the wrong kind of attention. Your real mission is considerably more complex. You're to establish contact with Scottish nobles who might be amenable to English influence, assess the military capabilities of various factions, and identify opportunities for English intervention that would be both effective and deniable. Most importantly, you're to evaluate the possibilities for eliminating Robert Stewart, the regent who's been most effective at maintaining Scottish resistance and who represents the greatest obstacle to English objectives in the region. It's not assassination exactly, at least not yet, but the mission parameters make it clear that if the opportunity arises to remove Stewart through methods that can't be traced back to English involvement, such action would be viewed favourably by the Crown. The journey to Scotland takes you through border country that bears the scars of decades of intermittent warfare, burned villages, abandoned castles, fields reverting to wilderness because there aren't enough people left to work them. This is what happens when warfare becomes endemic rather than occasional, when entire regions become uninhabitable because neither side can maintain effective control. But there are also signs of resilience and recovery. New settlements built with defense in mind, trade routes that have adapted to avoid areas of greatest danger, communities that have learned to survive in conditions that would have destroyed their grandparents. The Scottish court at Stirling, when you finally reach it, is a study in contrasts. The formal structures of royal government continue to function, with all the ceremony and protocol appropriate to an independent kingdom, but underneath the surface, you can sense the tensions created by military defeat, financial exhaustion, and political divisions that threaten to tear the country apart. Robert Stewart receives you with the careful courtesy due to an envoy from a hostile but temporarily non-aggressive neighbour. He's a man in his 30s, intelligent enough to have survived the complex politics of Scottish succession disputes, and experienced enough to understand the true purpose of your mission, regardless of your official credentials. The conversation that follows is a masterpiece of diplomatic fencing, with both sides probing for weakness, while maintaining the fiction that you're engaged in routine prisoner negotiations. Earl Warwick's concern for his captured men is touching. Stewart observes with just enough irony to make his point without causing outright offence, though one wonders why such concern requires sending someone of your evident capabilities. It's a polite way of saying that your reputation from the tournament circuit has preceded you, and that he understands you're not here merely to arrange prisoner exchanges, but it's also an opening for the kind of conversation that might reveal useful information. His lordship values thorough representation in all matters touching his interests. You reply carefully. And His Majesty's government is always interested in opportunities to reduce tensions along the border. What follows is 3 weeks of the most complex negotiations you've ever participated in, conducted on multiple levels simultaneously. Officially, you're discussing prisoner exchanges, local truces, and commercial arrangements. Unofficially, you're gathering intelligence about Scottish military preparations, political alliances, and the personal vulnerabilities of key figures. Stewart proves to be a more formidable opponent than you expected. He's not just intelligent but genuinely gifted at the kind of political maneuvering that keeps divided kingdoms functioning despite external pressure and internal discord. He manages to reveal almost nothing useful, while extracting information about English intentions that you didn't realize you were providing. But intelligence gathering isn't just about formal conversations, it's about careful observation, strategic eavesdropping, and the kind of social infiltration that allows you to understand the informal networks that often matter more than official hierarchies. You spend evenings in taverns where Scottish knights gather to complain about their government, listening to conversations that reveal military capabilities and political grievances. You attend religious services where the prayers include pointed references to Scottish independence and English oppression. You participate in hunting expeditions that allow you to observe the countryside and assess its defensive potential. Most importantly, you develop relationships with Scottish nobles who might be amenable to English influence if the right incentives were offered. Not traitors exactly, but pragmatists who understand that Scottish independence might be less valuable than Scottish prosperity under English protection. The breakthrough comes during your 3rd week, when one of these potential allies, Sir Malcolm Bruce, a knight whose family lost significant lands during recent fighting, approaches you with a proposition that could change the entire strategic situation. Stewart's position isn't as secure as he pretends, Sir Malcolm tells you during a carefully arranged private meeting. There are those of us who believe that continuing resistance serves no useful purpose, that accommodation with England offers better prospects for our people than endless warfare. It's exactly the kind of opening that your mission was designed to create, but it comes with complications that make you understand why espionage is considered more dangerous than straightforward combat. Because Sir Malcolm isn't just offering to betray his regent, he's offering to kill him, in exchange for English guarantees about his family's future and a role in whatever government replaces Stuart's regency. It would have to look natural, he explains with the calm detachment of someone discussing agricultural techniques. An accident during a hunting expedition perhaps, or a fever that proves unexpectedly fatal. Something that can't be traced to English involvement or to anyone with obvious motives. It's the moment when your mission crosses the line from intelligence gathering to active conspiracy, when diplomatic cover becomes accessory to murder, when the theoretical becomes horribly practical, and you have perhaps 30 seconds to decide whether you're the kind of knight who can authorize assassination in service of royal policy, or the kind who draws lines that can't be crossed regardless of strategic necessity. The decision you make in that Scottish castle, sitting across from a man who's offering to commit regicide for English gold, will define not just the success of your mission, but the kind of person you're becoming in service to the crown. You choose pragmatism over principle, strategic necessity over chivalric ideals, not because you're evil or ambitious, but because you understand that Stuart's death will save thousands of lives by ending a war that Scotland can't win, and England can't afford to continue indefinitely. Such an arrangement would require careful coordination, you tell Sir Malcolm, using the neutral language that commits you to the conspiracy without explicitly endorsing murder, and absolute assurance that no connection to English interests could be established. What follows is 2 weeks of planning that would make professional assassins envious. Every detail must be perfect, every contingency anticipated, every possible connection to English involvement eliminated, because if the plot is discovered, it won't just mean your death, it will mean war renewed with a vengeance that could destabilize the entire border region. The method you finally settle on is elegant in its simplicity. Stuart regularly hunts in the forests near Stirling, accompanied by a small party of trusted companions. During one of these expeditions, he'll suffer an apparent accident, thrown from his horse after the animal steps in a concealed hole, struck in the head by a falling branch, something that could happen to anyone who spends time in dangerous terrain. Sir Malcolm's role is to ensure that Stuart's hunting party includes men loyal to him rather than to the regent, and to create the circumstances that make the accident possible. Your role is to be nowhere near Scotland when it happens, establishing an unshakable alibi through your presence at English court functions. But the best-laid plans of spies and traitors often fail for reasons that no amount of preparation can anticipate. And this one fails because Robert Stuart is both more intelligent and more paranoid than anyone gives him credit for. He's suspected for weeks that English envoys aren't really interested in prisoner exchanges, and he's been conducting his own investigation into the various Scottish nobles who've been showing unusual interest in accommodation with English interests. When Sir Malcolm makes his move, Stuart is ready for him. The hunt that was supposed to end with Stuart's accidental death instead ends with Sir Malcolm's very deliberate execution, carried out in public to send a message to anyone else who might be considering collaboration with foreign powers. You learn about the failure while attending a feast at Windsor Castle, the news delivered by a royal messenger whose expression makes it clear that this isn't going to be a pleasant conversation. Sir Malcolm Bruce has been executed for treason. Sir John Chandos informs you in a private meeting that takes place while the festivities continue in the Great Hall. Robert Stuart apparently anticipated the plot and took appropriate countermeasures. The implications are immediately obvious. If Stuart knows about Sir Malcolm's conspiracy, he probably knows about English involvement. If he knows about English involvement, he knows about your role in planning and coordinating the assassination attempt, which means that your cover as a diplomatic envoy has been blown, your usefulness for covert operations has been compromised, and your life expectancy has dropped significantly if you ever set foot in Scotland again, you ask, though you're not sure you want to hear the answer. Sir John's expression suggests that the news could be better, enough to make your future visits to Scotland inadvisable, not enough to prove English involvement to neutral observers. Sir Malcolm apparently died without revealing the full extent of his communications with English representatives. It's both better and worse than you feared. Better because the plot can't be definitively traced to English instigation, which means it won't become a diplomatic incident that forces resumed warfare. Worse because your identity is compromised, which means your career in covert operations is effectively over before it properly began. But failure, your learning, is also education when properly understood. The mission taught you skills that conventional knightly training doesn't cover: intelligence gathering, conspiracy, the management of assets who may be more dangerous to you than to your enemies. More importantly, it taught you something about the gap between the ideals of chivalric service and the realities of serving a crown, whose interests sometimes require methods that can't be reconciled with traditional notions of honor and fair play. These lessons prove invaluable when you're reassigned to more conventional military duties, because understanding political complexity makes you a more effective officer and a more valuable advisor to commanders who need counsel about more than just tactical questions. Your next assignment comes 6 months later, when King Edward decides that the situation in Gascony requires reinforcement by proven officers who can be trusted with independent command. It's a promotion disguised as a lateral transfer, recognition that your capabilities extend beyond simple combat prowess to include the kind of strategic thinking that's increasingly important as English military commitments become more complex. The journey to Bordeaux takes you through France, that's been shaped by 15 years of English occupation and French resistance. Some regions have adapted successfully to English rule. their prosperity rebuilt through trade and agriculture. Others remain hostile, their populations resentful, and their loyalty questionable. But everywhere you go, you see evidence of how prolonged warfare changes societies in ways that go beyond simple military control. Traditional feudal relationships have been disrupted by the demands of constant campaigning. Economic patterns have shifted to support military requirements. Social hierarchies have been altered by the opportunities and dangers created by occupation and resistance. Gascony itself, when you finally reach it, presents a microcosm of these broader changes. The duchy has been English for 2 centuries, but recent French pressure has created divisions between those who see their future with England and those who believe French rule offers better prospects. Your command consists of 200 men-at-arms and a similar number of archers, professional soldiers whose job is to maintain English control over territory that's strategic importance far exceeds its immediate economic value. They're good men, experienced in the kind of warfare that characterized the French campaigns, but they're also tired, homesick, and unclear about why they're fighting for lands that most of them will never see again after their service ends. The challenge you face isn't primarily military. French forces in the region aren't strong enough to threaten English positions directly. It's political and administrative, requiring you to maintain stability in territories where the population's loyalty is conditional and the local elite's cooperation depends on their perception of English strength and permanence. This requires skills that go well beyond those taught in traditional knightly education. You need to understand economics well enough to manage taxation and trade. You need diplomatic skills sufficient to negotiate with local leaders who may be secretly corresponding with French agents. You need administrative competence to oversee the complex logistics of maintaining military forces in territory that's partially hostile. Most importantly, you need the kind of political intelligence that allows you to distinguish between genuine threats and routine discontent, between problems that can be solved through negotiation and those that require force. The test of these skills comes when you receive intelligence about a planned uprising in the city of Agen, where French agents have been organizing resistance to English rule and coordinating with external forces that might provide military support. The situation is delicate because Agen is strategically important but politically sensitive. The city has been cooperative with English administration for years, but recent tax increases necessitated by military expenses have created resentment that French agents have been exploiting. A heavy-handed response might eliminate the immediate threat but create broader resistance that could spread throughout the region. Your investigation reveals that the conspiracy involves perhaps 50 people, including several prominent merchants, a handful of minor nobles, and a significant portion of the city's clergy. They're not planning immediate rebellion, but rather coordinating with French forces that might invade later in the year, providing intelligence about English defensive preparations, and organizing support networks that could facilitate a successful French offensive. The traditional response would be mass arrests, public trials, and executions designed to terrorize the population into continued submission. It's a proven method for suppressing rebellion, and it's what most military commanders would recommend. But you've learned enough about political intelligence to understand that terrorism often creates more problems than it solves, particularly when dealing with populations that have alternatives to continued submission. Instead, you choose a more sophisticated approach that targets the leadership while offering amnesty to followers, that addresses legitimate grievances while punishing actual treason, that demonstrates English strength without creating martyrs who might inspire future resistance. The operation unfolds over 3 nights, with coordinated arrests that remove the conspiracy's leadership while leaving most participants unaware that their plot has been discovered. The merchants and nobles who organize the resistance disappear quietly, officially transferred to other regions for administrative reasons. The clergy who provided spiritual justification for rebellion are reassigned to remote parishes where their influence will be negligible. Most importantly, you use the intelligence gathered during the investigation to address the economic complaints that made the conspiracy possible in the first place. Tax rates are adjusted to more realistic levels. Trade restrictions that serve no useful purpose are eliminated. Local officials who've been skimming revenues are replaced with more honest administrators. The result is a resolution that strengthens English control while actually improving relationships with the local population. The conspiracy is eliminated without creating the kind of martyrs and grievances that fuel future resistance. Economic conditions improve enough to reduce the appeal of French promises about liberation and prosperity. It's not the kind of dramatic victory that gets celebrated in songs or recorded in chronicles, but it's the kind of success that makes empires sustainable rather than simply spectacular. More personally, it establishes your reputation as the kind of officer who can handle complex political situations without creating unnecessary complications for his superiors. Word of your success reaches not just your immediate commanders but the highest levels of English government, where officials are always looking for competent administrators who can be trusted with sensitive assignments, which is why 18 months later you receive the summons that will define the next phase of your career and test everything you've learned about the relationship between military service and political responsibility.